These are your Mexican-American War notes. Remember that you're not required to take notes. However, whatever notes you do take while viewing this video can be used on your graded warm-up. First, let's go over a few of the key vocabulary words. I know a lot of people had trouble finding redback if you were not using the textbook. So a redback is something that was used during President Lamar's terms of office, and he worked to lessen the huge public debt from the war against Mexico by creating an additional form of currency. This type of money was called a redback. However, this money quickly shrank in value and it actually became worthless. Then you also have an expenditure, and this simply refers to money that is paid out. And then you have cabinet, which is a government word, and this means it's the heads of all the departments of the executive branch. The executive branch is the president in the U.S. government. This would be the governor if you're referring to Texas government. And the cabinet is all of those important heads of the departments that work with that president. Then we have annexation, which hopefully you know this one by now. This is what the U.S. did to Texas. It's when one country or a territory incorporates another into itself. Basically, one country is like a big shark and it goes to eat the fish. So the United States would be like that shark going to eat Texas, the little fish, making it part of itself. Finally, there's manifest destiny. Recall the American Progress painting for this one. It shows the idea that the United States has the God-given right to expand from the East Coast to the West. This is the idea that allowed Polk to annex Texas and also spread all the way west and take more land from Mexico. So the Mexican-American War began in 1846 and started because of the disputed boundary between the United States and Mexico in South Texas. Recall, Mexico said that the northern Nueces River was the boundary between the United States and Mexico. However, the U.S. says it's the Rio Grande. That leaves the area in between the two rivers, an area of land that both countries think belongs to them. This was one of the major reasons that war began. However, Mexico also never honored Texas's independence formally. There were some Mexican citizens who believed Texas was its own country, but the government never recognized it. Therefore, when the U.S. annexed Texas, Mexico never recognized that annexation. The U.S. also wanted Mexico's land in order to achieve manifest destiny, which very much angered the Mexican government and citizens. This brings us back to border conflicts. All parts of the United States that bordered Mexico, people struggled to decide where those borders lines really were. Another interesting note, this Mexican-American War is actually called the War of North American Invasion in Mexico. It's interesting to think about why. So the fighting for the Mexican-American War wages for 2 years, 1846 to 1848, and U.S. President Polk sends troops down to invade Mexico after claiming that Mexico attacks the United States on U.S. soil. However, the attack actually took place on the disputed land, and so the Mexican citizens thought they were just defending their land. After the fighting, Mexico does end up surrendering and signs the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This treaty is signed in 1848, and the U.S. is the one who comes out on top. Not only does Mexico agree to recognize the Rio Grande as the border in between the United States and Mexico, which was the original border that Texas believed existed, however, they also gain the land of the Mexican Cession. This land includes parts or all of present-day California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. You can see on this map here that this lighter colored section is all of the land that the United States gets from this Mexican Cession, as written out in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. That is all the land that used to be Mexico's. Therefore, you can visually see that the United States does come out on top. This treaty also assures the Mexican citizens that are living in that Mexican Cession land that they will still get to live on that property and their rights will be honored. So they're not, although this land is becoming United States land, they're not kicking out Mexican citizens already living there. These citizens are given 1 year to decide if they'd like to join the U.S. This treaty also helps the United States become a major world power as it grows in size and therefore influence. You know that one of the advantages of adding Texas to the United States was that the southern states would get another slave state. However, this was a disadvantage for those who wanted slavery to end in the U.S. These issues about slavery do not end with the annexation. In fact, tensions only rise. The U.S. was excited by the new land gained through the annexation of Texas and the Mexican cession, but now it has a problem because it has to decide whether those new states are going to be free states or slave states. Congress battles for 4 years before finally deciding on the solution to this problem, the solution being popular sovereignty. We'll look at that on the next slide. But basically, Congress is scared of a civil war, which is a war that happens within a country, and so they decide on a compromise in order to avoid the war. This compromise is known as the Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 includes multiple aspects. Number one being California is admitted to the United States as a free state. So while Texas has slaves, California is admitted as a free state. The slave trade also becomes abolished in D.C., which is where our country's capital is located. This means people can still have slaves, but the trade of slaves is ended. No more new slaves can be brought in. The territory of New Mexico, which also includes present-day Arizona, is not a state yet. It's just a territory. However, this territory and the Utah territory, they have to rely on popular sovereignty in order to decide their means on slavery. Popular sovereignty is basically the doctrine under which the status of slavery in the territories is determined by the settlers themselves. It was created by the U.S. Congress in order to provide a solution to the slave versus free state issue when admitting new states. The U.S. knew they were only going to grow and needed to have some solutions so this didn't continue every time. It basically states that the settlers in each territory decide for themselves if slavery is allowed or not. It applies to the New Mexico and the Utah territories at this time being the Compromise of 1850, and those people get to vote to decide if the slaves were allowed. Other aspects of the Compromise of 1850 include the Fugitive Slave Act, which requires all U.S. citizens to assist in the return of runaway slaves. Basically, it makes it the duty of all Americans to capture escaped slaves. Texas also gives up much of its land in the West to other states, not freely, but because the United States now owns Texas, they now own Texas's land. So that land goes to other states, but Texas gets $10 million in return in order to pay off its debt from the war against Mexico. So there is a trade-off. After the Compromise of 1850, this is what the breakdown of slave versus free states look like. I apologize for the dark color, but the free states and territories are this lighter color right here. So those states are all free states or free territory. Slave states are this darker color, starting with Texas all the way over here to the East Coast. There's only 2 states that are determined by popular sovereignty at this time. That's the Utah Territory and New Mexico Territory. So this middle dark color is the Utah and New Mexico Territory, and that's decided by popular sovereignty. Again, remember that's where the settlers in that area get to decide for themselves if slavery is allowed or not. Finally, just a few reminders for you. On Monday, April 1st, there's going to be a quiz over Chapter 12 for A Day, and that same quiz will take place on Thursday, April 3rd for B Day. However, this is different from your warm-up, which will be taking place next class and will be graded because it has questions from this video. Remember, any notes that you took, you're welcome to use. The quiz on April 1st and or April 3rd, depending on which applies to you, will be a closed note quiz, and we'll do more in-class review before taking this. I just want you to have it on your calendar. So feel free to go back, rewind, take whatever notes you find important. Main idea questions are what's going to be asked on the graded warm-up. Good luck.